a chance to fly the Apache.
Her request seemed absurd, almost laughable. A fragile figure, standing before hardened pilots, daring to ask for the Apache's controls. But when the colonel flipped through the pages of her record, the air shifted. Battle scars, covert missions, silent heroism. Her past spoke louder than any word she could say. Suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. The hangar was alive with noise. Metal beams rattled faintly overhead. The concrete floor echoed under heavy boots. The smell of jet fuel, grease, and cold steel clung to the air. Rows of AH-64 Apaches stood like predators at rest, hulking silhouettes of power, each one armed, each one deadly. This was not a place for the untested, not a place for hesitation. It was a domain of hardened warriors, men who had carved their names into the sky, through fire, through smoke, through war. And that was why her entrance was so jarring. The massive steel doors at the far end groaned open. The conversations quieted, just for a second, and then, through the gap, she walked in. A small figure. A woman, not much more than 5.5 feet tall. Her frame seemed delicate compared to the giants around her. Her uniform was neat but unadorned. No combat patches flaunted across her sleeves. No wings gleamed on her chest. Just a plain, quiet presence moving toward them. Boots clicked softly against the floor. Every step seemed to echo far louder than it should. It was not confidence exactly, but it was not fear either. She walked as if she had decided long ago she would be here, no matter what storm waited. The pilots noticed. Their conversation stalled. Glances shifted. Whispers began. And then she spoke. Her voice was steady. Not loud, but clear. I would like a chance, she said, to fly the Apache. For a second, there was only silence. Her words hung in the air, too absurd for anyone to immediately process. And then, laughter exploded. It started as a low chuckle from one corner. Then another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the hangar erupted in mockery. Deep, rolling laughter from men who had spent years proving themselves in combat. It wasn't the laughter of amusement. It was the laughter of dismissal. You, one pilot barked, doubling over with a grin. You're in the wrong hangar, sweetheart. Another leaned against the tail of the nearest Apache, smirking. Maybe she thinks this is a tourist ride. A third waved his hand dramatically. Careful, fellas. She might trip climbing into the cockpit. The room shook with her gaze fixed forward, but that only fueled their mockery. One man shook his head in exaggerated disbelief. What's next? You want to carry a Hellfire missile on your back, too? Another spat on the point her toward the kitchen, not the cockpit. The laughter roared louder at that. It wasn't just mockery now. It was humiliation, the kind that tried to strip someone down to nothing. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on each man. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't even flinch. In that silence, it unsettled them. The laughter carried on, but beneath it, too long to dismiss someone so quickly. Confidence often looked loud, brash, reckless. But real experience? Real scars? They carried themselves differently, quietly, and she was quiet. The ridicule reached its peak. The pilots were circling her now, words flying like stones. You'll never even start the engine. You'll faint from the recoil. Better go practice on a drone. Little girl. Every sentence dripped with arrogance. Every voice layered another wall of contempt. Still, she didn't move. Her boots rooted to the floor. Her hands steady at her sides. Her shoulders squared. The storm raged around her, but she was the eye of it. One young pilot leaned close, sneering. You really think you can touch that bird? You'll kill yourself before you even lift off. Her eyes finally moved. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something else, something that unsettled him. It was the look of someone who had already survived worse, the look of someone who had already stared down death and wasn't afraid of laughter. The young pilot stepped back, his grin faltering for just a moment. But the others didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy mocking. The colonel finally moved. His chair creaked as he leaned forward. He pulled open a drawer. Inside was a thick folder, edges frayed, papers. Marked. He placed it on his desk, ran his fingers over the cover. His expression hardened. For now, the room was still filled with ridicule. The storm of arrogance swelled louder, drowning out everything else, but would not last, because inside that folder was her truth, her record, her past, the story no one in that hangar knew. And once it was read, the laughter would, the arrogance would collapse, and silence, heavy, undeniable silence, would take its place. But in this moment, in this first chapter, the scene was set. A fragile figure in the middle of giants, mockery echoing across steel walls, derision cutting sharper than any blade. This was the mockery, the cruel beginning, the storm before the revelation. And though they did not yet know it, every laugh, every insult, every careless word was about to turn into regret. Because this woman was not what they thought. Not at all. She was something far greater. And soon, they would realize it. The laughter still echoed across the hangar. It bounced against the steel walls. It rolled beneath the silent shadows of the Apaches. It clung to the air like smoke that refused to clear. But at the far end of the room, behind a scarred oak desk, the colonel did not laugh. He hadn't joined in once. His face was still. His hands rested on the thick folder before him. A folder he had pulled out the moment she made her request. His eyes were fixed on her, that fragile figure standing calm in the storm of mockery, not fighting back, not pleading, not breaking. He had seen arrogance before. It always burned loud, hot, and fast. But he had also seen something else in his years, quiet resilience, the kind carried by those who have been tested beyond measure, the kind that could not be faked. And something about her silence unsettled him. With a slow breath, he opened the file. The sound of paper rustling seemed louder than the laughter around him. He turned the first page, and immediately his eyes narrowed. The record was thicker than he expected. Dozens of pages, not the thin packet of a novice, but the heavy weight of a career. Already lived. His brow furrowed. The pilots hadn't noticed yet. They were too busy jeering, tossing cruel remarks like knives. But a few of them, standing closer, saw the change in the colonel's expression. His easy posture stiffened. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened as if each line he read carried a hidden weight. The laughter began to fade. Not all at once, but in uneven drops. One man stopped chuckling. Another fell silent mid-sentence. They noticed the colonel wasn't smiling. He wasn't amused. He turned another page, then another. The deeper he went, the heavier the silence grew. He saw commendations. More than a few. Not just standard service medals, but awards given only in the darkest corners of combat. Marks of valor. Marks of sacrifice. Age. Not for someone standing quietly in his hangar, asking to fly. He looked up from the file. The woman hadn't moved. Her posture was the same. Her eyes calm, unwavering. She knew what he was reading. She knew exactly what was on those pages. The laughter had almost died now. Confusion rippled through the pilots. They exchanged glances. Their confidence faltered. The sound of their own arrogance seemed out of place against the silence pressing in. One finally spoke. Colonel, what is it? The colonel didn't answer. He turned another page instead. And there it was again. Evidence of missions carried out in the shadows. Operations marked classified. Details blacked out, but outcomes clear. Objectives secured. Lives saved. Odds defied. The handwriting of commanding officers appeared in the margins. Words like indispensable, fearless, irreplaceable. He leaned back in his chair for just a moment. Exhaled slowly. Then leaned forward again, his hands gripping the folder more tightly. This wasn't the record of someone inexperienced. This wasn't the record of someone fragile. This was the record of a survivor. A warrior. Someone who had already carried burdens these men could hardly imagine. The silence deepened. One of the pilots shifted uneasily. Another rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the colonel. They didn't know why the air felt heavier now, but it did. The colonel cleared his throat. It was not loud, but in the quiet that had spread, it was enough to cut through every corner of the hangar. "Do you know?" he said softly, his voice low but firm. "What's written in here?" The pilots looked at each other. They shook their heads. The colonel's eyes returned to the file. "She has flown missions you will never hear about. She has stepped into combat zones where survival was a coin toss. She has been wounded, more than once, and still returned to the field, time and time again." His words hung, heavy in the air, not shouted, not dramatized, just spoken as fact. And facts carried weight. The pilots' expressions shifted. Mockery drained from their faces. Some looked at the woman again, really looked this time, and what they saw unsettled them, because now, standing in the same calm posture, she seemed different, not fragile, not out of place, but dangerous. The colonel kept reading. His voice grew harder, colder. Commendations for valor. Recommendations from commanders with 20 years more experience than you. Operations where entire units credited survival to her. Actions. He stopped, closed the file halfway, and looked at them. "You laughed." The words were quiet, but they cut sharper than any shout. The pilots shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. The colonel placed a hand on the folder. "This isn't a rookie. This isn't a tourist. This isn't someone pretending to belong." He paused. His eyes moved to her. For the first time, a flicker of respect showed in his gaze. "This," he said, "is a soldier who's already proven herself. More than any of you standing here today." The silence was absolute now. The sound of the hangar had changed completely. No laughter, no arrogance, just the weight of realization pressing down. The woman had not spoken since her first request. She didn't need to. Her record spoke for her. Every line, every medal, every scar written between the words. The colonel closed the folder gently, as though it carried something sacred. And in many ways it did. When he looked up again, his decision was clear. He would not mock her. He would not dismiss her. He would give her the chance she had asked for. The pilots understood it too. The room that had been filled with cruel laughter just moments ago now felt like a courtroom where judgment had been passed. And they were the ones condemned. Condemned by their own arrogance. Condemned by their failure to see. The colonel's voice broke the silence one last time. "You should remember this moment, because today you laughed at someone who deserves your salute." The colonel's fingers rested on the thick folder. It looked ordinary. Olive green cover, worn edges, a little dust clinging to its spine. But inside were pages that weighed far more than paper. Inside were scars, battles, and truths the pilots around him could not yet imagine. He drew in a slow breath. The silence stretched thin. Men shifted in their seats, boots scraping faintly against the hangar floor. The laughter that once filled the air had evaporated. All that remained was anticipation and doubt. Finally, the colonel spoke. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You think she doesn't belong here? You think this is a joke? Fine. Then listen, and remember every word." He flipped the folder open. The pages whispered as they turned, crisp against his gloves. The first line he read made the room lean forward. Operation Black Dagger. Reconnaissance, deep infiltration. Target, enemy stronghold. He looked up. Not a recon team. Not a satellite feed. Her, alone, dropped 40 miles behind hostile lines. No support. No extraction. She walked out on her own. And the intelligence she carried back. It saved 200 soldiers from an ambush. His gaze hardened. 200 lives. A murmur rippled among the pilots. No one laughed. No one dared. The colonel turned the page. The next report was longer, written in precise military language. He translated it into something sharper. Operation Silent Storm. Urban combat. Chaos in the streets. Civilians trapped. Enemy fire everywhere. Her commanding officer down. Bleeding out. He paused. She assumed command. Without waiting. Without hesitation. She organized the evacuation herself. 30 civilians pulled from crossfire. She held the line with nothing but grit and a half-empty magazine. One of the younger pilots exhaled slowly. The sound echoed in the stillness. They all stared at her now, this small woman who had walked into their hangar and asked for the controls of an Apache as if it were nothing. But it was not nothing. It was everything. The colonel's voice dropped lower. The official recommendation on this mission was for immediate promotion. Do you know what that means? It means she didn't just survive. She led. She carried lives on her shoulders and refused to put them down. He flipped deeper into the file. Several pages were blacked out, entire paragraphs swallowed in ink. But the few words that remained told enough. Operation Glass Veil. Details classified. But the summary? Neutralized chemical. Threat. 50,000 civilian lives spared. He raised his head, meeting each pair of eyes. You heard me correctly. 50,000 people sleeping safely tonight because of her. A heavy quiet fell. The men shifted uncomfortably, as though their very boots weighed more than before. No one could meet her eyes. The colonel turned again. This page made him pause longer. His jaw tightened. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. Wounded in action. Multiple fractures. Shrapnel injuries. Still refused evacuation. Remained in combat until mission objectives were secured. His voice softened, almost breaking. She bled so others could live. She stood when most would have fallen. She fought when most would have begged for morphine. The pilots lowered their eyes. Their earlier smirks, their arrogance, seemed like a distant sin, a stain they could not scrub clean. For the first time, one of them, a captain with years of combat hours, took a step forward. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes was something raw. Shame, respect, both at once. The colonel closed the folder. The clap of its shutting rang loud, final, like the crack of a gavel. He stood straighter, shoulders squared, and walked toward her. His boots echoed across the concrete floor. Every step felt like judgment. Every step made the silence heavier. He stopped just inches away. For a moment, he only studied her face. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't shrink under his stare. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. It was not casual. It was not symbolic. It was recognition. Soldier, he said firmly, his voice resonant. You don't need my permission to stand here. You've already earned it, but you have it anyway. The words struck the hangar like a thunderclap. The pilots froze. Their pride shattered. Something deeper replaced it, reverence. One by one, they straightened. Boots clicked against the floor. Arms rose in unison. Salutes, crisp and deliberate. Not for show, not for orders, but for her. The woman returned the salute calmly. No smile, no triumph, just steady, unwavering acknowledgement. Because for her, this was not victory. This was not about winning respect. It was about truth. Truth that had been written in blood, in scars, in classified ink. Truth that no laughter could erase. The colonel's voice echoed once more, low and solemn. Remember this moment. Remember what you almost dismissed. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly and waits to be recognized. And in that hangar, surrounded by men who once mocked her, the truth finally stood tall. Unshakable, unquestioned, undeniable. The hangar doors groaned open, letting in a harsh line of desert sunlight. Dust swirled through the air as the massive silhouette of the Apache stood waiting, blades resting like the folded wings of a giant predator. All eyes turned toward her, this slight, unassuming figure, walking with measured steps toward the machine that defined dominance in the sky. For a moment, there was silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against the concrete walls. The same men who had laughed, who had dismissed her, now whispered among themselves, unsure whether this spectacle would end in triumph or disaster. The colonel's voice cut through the air. Strap her in. Two crew chiefs, still wearing traces of doubt in their expressions, guided her to the cockpit. She didn't resist, didn't even hesitate. Every movement was calm, deliberate, as if she had rehearsed this walk 1,000 times in her mind. She placed a gloved hand on the cold metal of the Apache's frame, letting it rest there for a second, almost like a greeting to an old friend. Inside, the cockpit smelled of oil, steel, and the faint residue of spent gunpowder. A smell every Apache pilot came to know. By heart, she lowered herself into the seat, strapped the harness across her chest, and adjusted the helmet with the confidence of someone who had done it before. Her fingers brushed over the controls. Not fumbling, not searching. She knew where everything was. The crew exchanged glances. Doubt wavered ever so slightly. The colonel climbed the ladder halfway, leaned in, and studied her face. No tremor, no panic, only focus. His eyes narrowed. "Show us." The turbines spooled up with a roar, the kind that rattled ribs and shook the ground beneath their boots. Dust blasted across the hangar floor. The rotor blades began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, chopping the air with relentless rhythm. The soldiers instinctively stepped back, shielding their eyes from the debris. The Apache came alive, vibrating with power, as if impatient to break free from gravity's pull. She gripped the cyclic, her breathing steady. The dashboard lights flickered green across the panel. One by one, systems checked out flawlessly. It was muscle memory, her hands moving with precision no rookie could mimic. Then, with a gentle pull, the beast lifted. The crowd fell into stunned silence. The Apache rose cleanly, smoothly, without the waver of inexperience. No ver corrección, no hesitación. She hovered just feet above the tarmac, perfectly balanced. The sound of the blades thundered. Above, drowning out the gasps of disbelief. "Impossible," one of the younger pilots muttered. "Not impossible," the colonel whispered. "Just unseen." She tilted the cyclic slightly. The Apache responded like an extension of her own body, drifting left, right, forward, back, each motion deliberate, controlled. It was not the clumsy dance of a beginner. It was the practiced flow of someone who had flown under fire, who had learned to trust instinct when seconds decided life or death. The colonel crossed his arms, hiding the storm rising inside him. He had seen rookies freeze. Under pressure, veterans falter in tests. But this woman, this stranger they had mocked, was rewriting the air itself. She nudged the throttle. The helicopter surged upward, climbing against the desert sky. The sun flared off its armor as it banked hard, almost brushing the edges of the hangar. Gasps erupted. A few men cursed under their breath, convinced she'd lose control and smash into the concrete. But she didn't. The Apache rolled gracefully into the turn, slicing the air with surgical precision. And then came the moment no one expected. A crosswind swept across the base, harsh, sudden, violent. It hit the helicopter broadside, sending a shudder through its frame. The crowd tensed. Even the colonel's jaw tightened. This was where most faltered. This was where doubt turned into disaster. But she didn't flinch. Her hands worked the controls with practiced calm, countering the gust with exact, measured pressure. The Apache wavered for half a heartbeat, then steadied, locking back into balance, as though defying the wind itself. The colonel's lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen seasoned pilots lose birds to less. What she had just done, without panic, without wasted motion, spoke louder than any metal on a chest. She wasn't just flying, she was commanding. The helicopter soared higher, banking out over the training field. She put it through its paces, sharp banks, rapid ascents, combat dives. Each maneuver was crisp, efficient. The Apache moved like it was born for her hands, like it had been waiting for her all along. On the ground, men who once sneered now stood with mouths open, eyes wide, helmets clutched against their chests. A few forgot to breathe. Every motion in the sky was a slap against their arrogance. Every turn a reminder of how little they knew about the stranger in their midst. The colonel kept watching, his gaze locked on her. He thought back to the pages of her record, the lines that hinted at classified missions, unspoken scars, silent heroism. It wasn't just paperwork. It was alive. It was unfolding in front of him, in the roar of blades and the defiance of gravity. Minutes passed, though they felt like seconds. She pushed the Apache harder, executing a maneuver that made several men step back in disbelief. A combat roll that tilted the horizon itself. The helicopter dropped low, skimming the field, then shot upward in a climb so fierce it seemed to tear at the sky. And then, with a steady hand, she brought home. The Apache descended, blades chopping slower, the roar softening as it approached the tarmac. Her landing was flawless, smooth, precise, like a bird settling on its perch. Not even a jolt of imbalance. The turbines whined down, the blades slowed, and at last, silence returned to the hangar. The canopy lifted. She removed her helmet, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes unshaken. She looked out at the sea of faces, faces that had mocked her. Hours earlier, no words left her lips. She didn't need them. The Apache had spoken for her. The colonel stepped forward, boots echoing against the concrete. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then he straightened his posture, raised his hand, and delivered a crisp salute. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A colonel saluting first? To a woman they had laughed at? But none dared to question it, because in that salute was the truth they could no longer deny. Respect had been earned, not demanded, not begged for, but seized in the air above them. And for the first time since she walked into that hangar, there was no laughter, only silence. Heavy, humbled silence. The roar of the rotors faded into memory, and the great Apache stood still on the tarmac, like a predator that had finally folded its wings. The hangar air was thick, filled with the scent of dust, fuel, and something heavier, silence. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of men forced to confront the collapse of their own certainty. The same men who had laughed, who had mocked, who had reduced her to a punchline, now found themselves staring without words. She descended from the cockpit with deliberate steps, the helmet tucked under her arm, her eyes steady. The desert wind caught her hair, lifting stray strands across her face, but she didn't move to fix them. Every step she took echoed on the concrete floor, and those echoes sounded far louder than the roar of the helicopter that had shaken the hangar minutes before. The colonel advanced to meet her, his boots striking with purpose. He stopped only a few feet away, close enough to see the sheen of sweat on her brow, the calm rise and fall of her breath. He searched her face for fear, or pride, or maybe even arrogance. He found none, only composure, only quiet strength. And then he raised his hand in salute. Gasps erupted like cracks in ice. For the colonel to salute first was unthinkable. It inverted the hierarchy, turning custom upside down. Yet no one dared to laugh, because in that moment, the gesture carried weight. It carried truth. She returned the salute, her movement clean and controlled. And for a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. The colonel's voice came low, but it carried across the hangar. You've seen what I've seen. Skill, composure, courage, qualities you cannot fake, qualities you cannot dismiss. He turned sharply toward the others. The soldiers shifted, unease pressing down on them. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by the kind of silence that burns the throat. Gentlemen, the colonel continued, his voice cutting like steel, you mock her request. You doubted her resolve, but your laughter has met its answer. Records tell us who someone was. Today has told you who she is. He reached into his jacket and pulled a folder, the one heavy with classified lines, commendations, scars translated into words. He flipped it open, his fingers sliding across the pages. His eyes scanned, then he read aloud, his tone steady. Operation Falcon's Gate. Night insertion, enemy territory. Wounded twice, yet extracted her team under fire. Award recommendation, Silver Star. Classified. The men shifted. The colonel's voice did not stop. Operation Silent Veil. Target, hostile weapons convoy. Mission compromised. She held position in hostile fire for 18 minutes until reinforcements arrived. Survivors owed their lives to her refusal to retreat. Award recommendation, Distinguished Flying Cross. Classified. The silence thickened. The soldiers' eyes widened. What they had dismissed as impossible now lay bare before them, line by line, etched in black ink and sealed by truth. The colonel closed the file with a snap that echoed like judgment. These are not just records. These are scars. And today, you witnessed with your own eyes that they were not accidents. They were not exaggerations. They were earned. He let the folder hang at his side, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Men who had stood tall only hours ago now seemed smaller, reduced by the weight of their own ignorance. Some bowed their heads. Some clenched their fists. Others simply stared, unable to reconcile the fragile figure they had mocked with the warrior revealed before them. One young pilot broke the stillness, his voice hesitant. "Sir, we didn't know." The colonel's reply was sharp, but not cruel. "No, you didn't. And that is the lesson. Do not judge by what you think you see. Do not assume weakness where you have not tested strength. Respect is not a gift you grant. It is a truth you recognize." The words struck hard, and though no man dared to argue, the shame on their faces was answer enough. She stood quietly through it all. She did not gloat. She did not scold. She allowed silence to speak for her, and it spoke louder than anything else in the hangar. Finally, the colonel's tone softened. He turned back to her. "You didn't have to prove anything today. Not to me, not to them, but you did. And in doing so, you've reminded us all that the sky doesn't care for laughter or doubt. The sky only answers to those strong enough to command it." She nodded once, her expression unchanged, yet her eyes flickered with something almost imperceptible, a glimmer of relief, perhaps, or closure. The colonel stepped back, and as if by silent cue, a ripple moved through the crowd. One by one, the soldiers straightened, their chins lifting. A few raised their hands in salute. Not all, not at first, but enough. Enough to shift the air again. The sound of boots clicking together filled the space, and what had begun as mockery transformed into recognition. No words were spoken, but their silence was different now. No longer dismissive, no longer cruel. This silence was heavy with respect. She had walked into the hangar as a stranger. She stood now as a warrior, not because of the colonel's salute, not because of the file, but because she had proven herself in the language only the Apache could understand. She placed her helmet back under her arm, her hand brushing once more across the cold metal of the helicopter's frame. It was a gesture both tender and resolute, as if she was thanking the machine for bearing witness to her truth. The colonel gave a final nod. Dismissed, the men began to disperse, though many looked back, their eyes lingering, unwilling to let the image fade too quickly. They knew they had seen something that would stay with them for years, maybe for life. The hangar grew quieter as footsteps faded. The desert sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the floor. She stood for a moment, longer, gazing toward the horizon, the sky that had so often tested her and so often defined her. For those who had doubted, the lesson was seared deep. True strength is rarely loud, rarely boastful. It hides in silence, waits in humility, and only reveals itself when challenged. And when it does, laughter dies. The colonel remained behind, watching her. His eyes were thoughtful, almost reverent. "You've reminded them," he said quietly. "And maybe you've reminded me too." She didn't reply. Words were unnecessary. She turned back to the Apache, her silhouette framed by the fading sun. For a moment, it looked as though the machine itself bowed to her presence, as though even the steel knew whose hands had commanded it. The colonel inhaled deeply, then walked away, his salute still heavy in his chest. And she stood alone, but not forgotten. Because legends don't need applause. They only need truth. If her story touched you, don't let it vanish into silence. Share it, because somewhere out there, another warrior waits in the shadows, misjudged, underestimated, unseen. And maybe your voice, your choice to tell their story, is what will finally bring them into the light.